Hello, welcome to the Daily Bible Podcast. My name is William Hemsworth. Thank you so much for joining me for today's show. Well, we continue on in Matthew chapter 14, and specifically we're going to finish the feeding of the 5,000 today, and that's the verses we're going to look at today are Matthew chapter 14, verses 19 through 21. And so over the previous few days, we see Jesus, taking 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish from a child, pretty much, his lunch. And it's a metaphor. It literally happened, but it's also a metaphor for us today because we often think that what we have to give to God is insignificant. But in the hands of Christ, it could be this huge miracle can take place. This huge blossom, if you will, can take place. Let's get to our scripture today. Matthew chapter 14, verses 19 through 21 say, "Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke and gave the loaves to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And they all ate and were satisfied, and they took up 12 baskets full of the broken pieces left over. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children." Now, a couple days ago, I talked about what it says here in verse 21, how Matthew is only recounting how Jesus fed the 5,000 men. In Jewish culture at that time, the men and the women ate separately. The men ate in one spot, and the women and children ate at another spot. So we have 5,000 men here. When you add the women and children, it may be 10, 15,000 people, which makes this miracle even more awe-inspiring. And so here we see Jesus feeding the disciples, feeding the crowd of people through the hands of the disciples. And this points to the priesthood in a way. The disciples' intermediary role, it points to the priesthood and the disciples' intermediary role. They distribute bread, which was provided by Jesus, and it's a prelude to what we see in the Eucharist at the Last Supper and what goes on in our churches. Like I said, I'm a Catholic, guys. Goes on in our churches every day in the Mass. It preludes the Eucharistic liturgy, where the priests of Christ, the new covenant, they give the bread of life, as Holy Communion to the faithful of the church. So thank you for joining me on this episode of the Daily Bible Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a fantastic day. We'll catch you tomorrow. God bless you.